So just to start off with, there's a lot of discussion in the endocrine world about hypothyroidism, which is a very common condition, right? 5% of the population, so a lot of people have primary thyroid failure and need thyroxine replacement. And as we teach all the medical students, basically you just give them thyroxine and you adjust the dose till they have a normal TSH, and then they're fine. And that happens to a large majority of people. But there are some people who think that they should have T3 as well. I'll explain that now. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we have used T3 for in the past, and we don't need it for that indication anymore. That indication being papillary thyrocarcinoma, which now has much better treatments. I'll go through the evidence for thyroxine alone working well. I'll tell you about what bias does to research, and then how people are now looking to what's called natural thyroxine in the form of various things, including ERFA thyroid and ARMA thyroid. And then I'll tell you a bit about how patients who are very tired sometimes believe that they might be helped by thyroxine or T3 or other stimulants. Okay. And then I'll show you what I've been doing in our T3 withdrawal clinic. So just to remind you all, the thyroid gland has got these follicular cells, okay? And in the middle of each follicle is the protein thyroglobulin, okay? And thyroglobulin is represented here by this pink stuff, okay, thyroglobulin, and it's a protein that binds to and holds on to thyroxine. So thyroxine is synthesized and stored in the thyroid gland. And all of us have got enough thyroxine for about a month in our thyroid gland. You don't need to synthesize it when you need it. It's made in advance. When you become hypothyroid, or if you need to, your pituitary makes more TSH. TSH turns on all the pathways that stimulate the production of thyroxine, okay? So it turns on the iodine trap, it turns on the synthesis of thyroxine, and you store it. And the other thing that TSH does is it comes down here and it releases some thyroxine, activating these enzymes, these proteolytic enzymes that open up the thyroglobulin and release thyroxine immediately. So when you give someone TSH, they rapidly secrete thyroxine, and then over time, they rebuild up the store. Okay, so you've got a nice big store of thyroxine, and you release it as you need it. And what does it do? It keeps your basal metabolic rate nice and normal. Okay, now I want to go back to the fact that inside your thyroid gland is this protein called thyroglobulin, because we can measure thyroglobulin. If I measure your thyroglobulin, it will be present. Okay, there'll be a number linked to it, and you shouldn't measure thyroglobulin in normal people because there's no normal range. Okay, it's just a high number because some of this protein leaks out into circulation. But it is useful in patients who have had their thyroid gland completely removed for thyroid cancer, and then it falls to zero because you have no thyroglobulin because you remove every single cell and you ablate the last few with radiation, with radioiodine. So then it becomes quite a good marker of recurrence. So if you get a recurrence of papillary thyrocarcinoma, the thyroglobulin becomes detectable, okay? And it's activated by TSH. So that's a little clue as how you look for metastases in the future. But that only works if you've had your thyroid removed. So if someone does a blood test for thyroglobulin, the lab assume the patient has had the thyroid out. So if there's any there, they report it as recurrence of cancer, which scares patients if you measure it inappropriately. Okay, so never measure thyroglobulin in anybody who's got a thyroid gland. Okay, so what we used to use T3 for was controlling TSH levels in patients who had got thyroid cancer. So supposing you were found to have thyroid cancer, right? You have a lump in your neck, you have it biopsied, it confirms cancer. You then proceed to a total thyroidectomy to remove the cancer, but also any other normal cells. You then ablate any remaining follicular cell, even normal ones, with radioiodine. You then give the patient a little bit more thyroxine than they should have. You make them slightly hyperthyroid, so you completely suppress the TSH, okay? And then from time to time, you do some iodine uptake scans. So if you want to see a metastasis, you need to give the patient some TSH, okay? And now we use recombinant TSH. So let's have my thyroid gland removed. I've got no cells left. If I want to check if there's any mets anywhere, I'll inject myself with some TSH, because I'm on thyroxine, so I won't make any of my own. But what we used to do before we had recombinant TSH was we'd stop the thyroxine and make the patient hypothyroid and have a high TSH. And with a high TSH, you can then scan them because the TSH will drive iodine into any cancer cells, okay? And the problem with that is when you make people hypothyroid, they feel really terrible for ages because you've got to stop. The thyroxines are long half-life. So what we used to do was switch them from T4 to T3, which is a nice short half-life, okay? And so what we do is 3 months before the scan, okay? So I see them in the thyroid cancer clinic and they're probably cured, but I said we need to be absolutely sure they haven't got metastasis. I'm going to stop with thyroxine to rise your TSH, but to make you not feel hypothyroid, I'll give you some T3. Okay, that's a large dose. And that's got a short half-life, and they don't feel hypothyroid. In fact, they like it, they're a little bit toxic. And then a week or 8 days before the scan, you stop the T3, and the T3 falls very quickly, and the TSH goes up really quickly. I'm properly hypothyroid only for a week, properly hypothyroid, and then you do the scan. Okay, they're hypothyroid, high TSH, and then you can look for mets. And if there are any, then you can deal with them with more radioiodine. If there aren't any, you say good news. Okay, so this is what a scan, the iodine scans that you would do in someone who has got a thyroid gland. Okay, so this is what you see in Graves' disease, smooth uptake. If it's normal, you see it looks the same, smooth uptake, but not quite so intense. If you've got thyroiditis, that is a virus, you release all your stored thyroxine and become toxic, but there's no uptake because the cells aren't working, okay? Then this is the worrying thing of a cancer cell, a cancer lump. So it's not taking up much iodine. And there's a hot nodule, which is not a problem at all. And then this right-hand bottom corner is really common, toxic multinodular goiters that are no worry at all. They look horrible, but they are not a worry at all. Okay, but if you remove the thyroid gland and you've cured the patient, and then a year later you do this, an iodine scan, and you give the patient. So this is an example who's got lots of mets everywhere. Okay, so this patient has the thyroid gland is gone. Okay, this is where it was. Okay, there's a met lower down though, and then there's lots of mets everywhere else. So this patient was given a dose. Well, first the T4 was stopped. They were switched to T3, and then 8 days later that was stopped. They are hypothyroid, they get a dose of radioiodine, you can see the mets, and you can also measure the thyroglobulin because the TSH is now high, activates all the cells to take up iodine. So that was what we use T3 for, but we don't need to anymore because we have recombinant TSH. Okay, so that role of T3 has disappeared. But what we used to do was the scan was negative, we restart the suppressive thyroxine, and we always aim for a suppressed TSH then for the next year because we believed that TSH will stimulate any cells that are there. If there's no cells there, then it doesn't matter, but we didn't know that. Now, then we discovered that we were giving people too much thyroxine to suppress the TSH, and we thought we were doing a good thing, but the problem is, it's not a problem, it's a good thing, they're living now long lives, and we're now starting to see the side effects of TSH suppression. That is osteoporosis. That definitely happens in a hyperthyroid. This is caused by us, right? And AF, and then strokes. And none of them, the recurrence rate after 7 years is 0. So we're moving our guidelines saying, if your thyroid cancer is low grade, then don't suppress the TSH. And the problem is, you need to see the histology. So it's quite difficult to make a decision if the patient, say, pitches up to casualty and you find they've got a suppressed TSH. If they've got a history of thyroid cancer, don't mess with it. Leave it suppressed, okay? It's not a mistake because the cancer is being suppressed by the lack of TSH. But the problem is, as we're getting older, the balance of risk is changing, and now we're going to see people getting AF, strokes, and osteoporosis, and a fracture and dying as a consequence. And so we're starting to reel back on the TSH suppression. Okay, and because the risk of thyroid cancer is really falling, it's being well treated and the risk is falling. Okay, and so we're then thinking about different ways of adjusting it. This is the standard feedback loop that we teach all the students about. And just to tell you that T4 is converted to T3 by these peripheral deodonases. Okay, so the other thing about thyroxine is if you take thyroxine by mouth, it will go round your liver, say, and the liver will convert some of it locally to T3. In fact, every cell will do that locally. So that's very good autoregulation. And if you give people T3, you bypass that. And that may be harmful. I don't know if it is or not, but there are some things that are definitely harmful about T3. So one of the problems I'm having is that there's no role for T3 now, in my view. And so I think we should just stop making it. But there are some patients who take T4 and T3, and they say, do you know, I feel better when I'm on the T3. And that's okay, right? And that belief is not very widespread, but some people hold it very strongly, okay? And so they would like to have T4 and T3. And in some countries, that's what happens. You make a tablet that contains both. And there are lots of studies that have looked at this, and none have found any benefit except one. And I'll tell you, this is where publication bias is absolutely potent, okay? So because they found a difference, it got into the New England Journal, right? Effective thyroxine as compared with thyroxine plus T3 in hypothyroid patients. And basically, they took, not a huge study, right? 33 patients, and they gave them 2 periods of either thyroxine or with some T3. And their conclusion, and I'll tell you, if you read the whole paper, which I'm not going to do, but basically they measured a whole load of well-being questionnaires, and many of them found no difference. They had no difference in anything practical, but one of the analog scales suggested possibly that the combination was a little bit better. And look at their conclusion. In patient hypothyroidism, partial substitution of T3 for T4 may improve mood and neuropsychological function. This finding suggests a specific effect of T3. So that was in 1999, like 20 years ago, just over that. And since then, it's been repeated loads of times and nobody else has found the same thing. But the problem is, if you find a negative result, you end up in journals that no one reads, like, you know, thyroid, okay? And that is a problem, okay? Yes, exactly. But you see, the problem is, Joe, you need to have some kind of fake false positive, I'm afraid, because all the studies that are correct have not got in there. Okay, they're in lower impact journals, right? And I've looked at them all, and they're much better done. So apart from that one study, which I'm going to call publication bias, the combination has not been a proven benefit. Okay, so that's there in the background there, and that the problem is, right, because of the internet, patients find that New England Journal paper very highly cited on all these websites that people believe is a good thing. And all the low impact papers that are right are ignored by these people who want T3. Then there's natural thyroxine, right? And so I get referrals like this. This hypothyroid patient says the symptoms are not improved by thyroxine. He surfs the net and he says, are you tired? Are you overweight? Yes, I am, but I've got a normal TSH. And they have heard of natural thyroxine. Can we get some? So let me tell you what, this is a great website, okay? armorthyroid.com, okay? This is an American website. And if you want to prescribe, you click on this link that says locate a doctor near you, okay? These are people who prescribe this because most of us don't. And you can get it. What is it? So armorthyroid contains quite a lot of T3 compared to T4, and it comes in grains. Where does it come from? So if you dig around that website, this looks quite nice. That was a nice child on the coast, right? It's lovely, doesn't it? So if you look at the questions, where did it come from? It's a natural product by, basically, they go to the abattoirs and collect all the thyroid glands and basically purify they don't put the thyroid, they just mash it up and put it into grains. So basically, you're getting a little bit of pig thyroid gland. But it's carefully measured, so it works out at about 9 micrograms of T3 and 30 T4, okay? And they say most people feel much better in a few days, and you can ask your doctor about it. Okay, and the other thing it says here, does it have an odor? It does. It stinks. Okay, it's got a strong characteristic odor. This does not indicate that it's spoiled or defective in any way. Okay, because it's porcine thyroid gland, okay? And this is if you dig around the website, you find out how they make it and how they process it. And to me, it's pretty artificial, really, but it is natural in that it's not synthesized. The molecule itself is not synthesized. Okay, so the problem with ARMA for me is that there's a lot of T3 because pigs' thyroid glands have more T3 than humans. And so all the patients on this stuff have a suppressed TSH. And therefore, they're, in my book, toxic, okay? So it causes short-term toxicity because it's got T3 that doesn't last the whole day. And they get palpitations sometimes when they take it, and they like that. But overall, they're tired. And so I'm not a fan of ARMA at all, okay? And the problem is you can get it from your naturopath. And the problem is the naturopaths don't believe in blood tests. They go, no, no, no. You just take it until you feel well. Don't do blood tests. Because the blood tests always tell you that you're on too much. And so they don't like blood tests. So they come to us for blood tests. And this is what you see. Suppressed TSH, crazily high T3, and normal T4, okay? And that's in the morning. But at nighttime, the T3 is lower. The TSH is always suppressed, though, because the pituitary knows they're on too much, okay? So the answer is we should not prescribe. And this is what I've asked. Well, the patient knows the risks and they feel so much better. What about quality of life? It's so important. And I'm saying, well, there's osteoporosis in AF and maybe prions even, but really, is it of benefit? Is it a placebo effect? There's one other thing, right? Since we've stopped using T3 for thyroid cancer, only one company make it. And you know my beef with price gouging. Well, this is a price gouge drug. T3 is very cheap to make, okay? This is a month's supply, £20 in 2009. And now one company, Mercury Pharmaceuticals, have jacked up the price to £250. So there are people who believe the T3 is better for them and they've been on it for a long time. And their GP is saying, hang on a sec. And NHS England have emailed and written to all the doctors in the country saying, if you've got a patient on T3, please stop because it's not indicated. And they cite a lot of my data saying, Mira and Atala have proven it doesn't work, which is true. Okay, so these are the reasons why we should not prescribe it. There's no evidence of benefit, apart from patients saying, I feel better, but they don't really. And now it's becoming very expensive, and we can use that money for other patients who have genuine need. Now, these patients, I will say, they are vulnerable because they are also on other non-medical supplements, let's say, which you can get from places like Holland and Barrett. If you go to Holland and Barrett, every drug in Holland and Barrett is a placebo, okay? They've got nuts and things, which are quite nice, but actually all the stuff they have is ineffective. So deodonases convert T4 to T3, okay? And these are, as I said, all locally produced. And so I'll put this slide up because there are a group of patients who believe that they are missing the gene for deodonates, and therefore they can't do it. But that's complete tosh because I've measured T3 and they clearly have plenty. Between those who take T3 and a good question, George, those who take T3 and unvaccinated patients. So there is, actually, I haven't asked this directly, but I will. I'll add it to my questionnaire, okay? What I have found is that in patients on ARMA thyroid, they are also on a number of other things like ashwagandha. Have you heard of ashwagandha? Ashwagandha is a herb, basically, that is meant to make you feel better and live longer, but it doesn't. So what happens is each organ does its own thing. Your thyroid gland makes T4, and each organ converts what it needs locally to T3. The thyroid gland also releases a bit of T3 as well, okay, at a concentration that we have a reference range for, okay? So why do we have T3 in circulation? I'm not really sure, but it's there, so maybe we should. Okay, so who benefits from T3? So if you look at data in terms of properly done, blinded studies, there's very good evidence of a potent placebo effect by lots of authors, okay? Big studies, 690 patients, okay? And they measure these various quality of life scores, okay? And when you tell them you're going to withdraw things, they think they're getting worse, but it doesn't change. It doesn't depend on what they're on. There's a persistent placebo effect, okay? And so there's the paper title, partial substitution of T4 with T3 in a large study. And the conclusion is, does not provide complete evidence of specific benefit from partial substitution, okay? And they emphasize a large and sustained placebo effect that can follow changes. So that's something to bear in mind. And then this is a bigger meta-analysis that basically clearly showed no benefit, okay? Apart from there's a study that might favor monotherapy, that is just thyroxine. Okay, and then more and more people start doing more and more studies, but more and more people say, but not in New England, unfortunately, more and more people say T4 monotherapy should remain the treatment of choice. Okay, so because of the price rise, a lot of GPs were struggling and started referring patients. So I set up a clinic that I clearly labeled as a T3 withdrawal clinic to help people come off T3. Okay, and I'll just tell you, the purpose of the clinic really was to get people who had had thyroid cancer, because of course, once you've got to year 7 of thyroid cancer, you no longer need T3 suppression. And some are on it, and if they're on it, then we could wean them off it. Okay, but suddenly, because of the price, instead of seeing 1 patient a month, we get 2 a week, and these people are really tired, and they've got chronic fatigue probably. Okay, most of them are on a normal dose of T4 and a variable dose of T3 either once or twice or 3 times daily. All hocus pocus, all different. There's no standard regimen. Depends who your nutritionist is. And a lot of them are on, as I said, ashwagandha, turmeric, and coenzyme Q. Heard of coenzyme Q, anybody? Coenzyme Q, you can actually get in Boots, okay? And doesn't do anything really. The problem is if you look up coenzyme Q, you might remember that it's on the electron transport chain inside your mitochondrion. So of course, I don't know what is in coenzyme Q, but if it is coenzyme Q, it's a protein that will be destroyed in the stomach. But anyway, if you look it up, it looks quite scientific and boffiny. So people think it must be good for you. They are definitely vulnerable, and the more expensive it is, the better they feel it is, but some of them can't afford it. And then you see, they remain tired. And that is a problem. And this is the thing, right? So this is the y-axis here is how I feel day to day, week to week, month to month. Okay. Yes, great into your wallet, right? So here I am feeling happy, and then I get a bit tired. I have a bad day in A&E, right? And then I'm feeling a bit worse. Okay, but I think I'll cope. And then when I get really down here, I think, oh, do you know what? I can't cope. I'm going to go and see a nutritionist who can help me. And they give me anything, right? Might be T3, might be ashwagandha, but whatever it is, I go, oh, do you know what? That was fantastic, that drug. And I have a inspirational moment of how great this new stuff is, okay? And I tell all my friends, do you know, you should go and see Dr. X. He'll give you this stuff that makes you feel fantastic. And I feel better and better and better. That's because the reason is the bias happens because these trials of therapy happen when you're at your worst ebb. You finally give in, okay? And then you assume that the thing you've taken has worked. It's like antibiotics for viral diseases. You have a virus, you go, no, don't need antibiotics. And then finally, someone gives you one, and you say, oh, I felt better then. And we say, oh, it must have been a secondary bacterial infection. No, it's just getting better by itself. And then what happens is whatever herb you're on wears off, okay? You can see them again, they give you another one and double their profits because they're not cheap, these herbs. So this is a real problem when you give patients a trial of therapy. Okay, we need to avoid that. Because basically you get the false placebo effect, and it's very potent with these 5 agents. Vitamin D I'm not against really, because it has a hidden benefit to my bones in the long term. But I can't say you feel better with vitamin D. That's nonsense. And the same with all those multivitamins that we're wasting money on. Okay, so this is my T3 withdrawal plan for one of the drugs called Urfa that comes as grains of 30 milligrams. Okay, milligrams. It's mostly nothing. And I say, okay, take 60 milligrams every day, which is what you're on anyway. And then you do it very slowly, and doing it like this makes people not feel terrible. And you halve the dose for 1 day, and you go back to your normal dose. And then the second week, you have 2 days on a lower dose. And you have more and more days until you're on 30, and you then keep on going till you're off it. And this is quite successful, okay? But it's very true. This is one of the patients who's been through the withdrawal protocol. So here she is, okay, when she arrives with a suppressed TSH, and on Urfa, she has a normal T3 and normal T4. This patient does not even have hypothyroidism. She's a normal person, right? Okay, yes, it does. Thank you, Jeremy. You're quite right. It does have a great placebo effect, and you're absolutely right on that front, okay? But I have to show you this. So here she is, okay, on Eartha, and she before was on nothing, but she feels terrible all the time, okay? And she's also got vitamin D deficiency probably because you've got secondary hyperparathyroidism with the PTH there behind, but ignore the PTH. So then she goes through that protocol. This is October to March, okay, this year. And by March, she's off it completely. And look at that, normal TSH, normal T3, normal T4. It hasn't really budged. So what's happened is she's now got TSH stimulating her gland to make some thyroxine, 0.75, and it comes up 1.18, 1.18. But all the time she says, I feel terrible, I feel terrible. And, you know, she comes and cries in the clinic, right? Saying, I'll get little, your results are normal, you're absolutely fine, you need to keep going and we'll succeed. And she's got a lot of other problems probably. So I thought, so this is not that long ago. Let me see when it was. It was, yeah, this is 20th of October 21. Okay, so quite recently. This is one of my other patients who I've been much more successful with, right? Now, with her case, she's off. This is her off everything, right? In fact, no, she's on 100. She has primary hypothyroidism at this point. So this starts at the bottom here, right? And I said to her, look, she said, I feel tired, please can I start? So I said, no, look, your TSH is normal, the T4 is normal, and your T3 is normal. And then I said, I'll tell you what, let's do a blind trial, okay? I will get made up a number of things, including T3 and T4, and this column here, every week I want you to go online and do an SF36. And I've got a system that's validated about how you feel, and we'll download the data every week and I'll do it blind. So I was blinded, I didn't know what she was on, but we gave her basically 2 weeks of each of these. So when we unblinded it, tube A had selenium, okay, which you can get from Holland and Barrett. And this is her well-being score. So baseline well-being was 230, normal TSH, normal T3, normal T4. She starts selenium, it goes up by 100 points. So there's a bit of placebo, or maybe it does something. Then she's given lactose, which is definite placebo, and she stays about the same. Then she has an extra bit of thyroxine. She does go up a little bit, and you can see the TSH goes down a tiny bit, but within the reference range. So this is 100 plus 12.5. Is it placebo? Yes, because she then gets, I think this is Pro Plus, and that gives a bit of a boost, okay? TSH normal. And then she had a cold, and she had lots of comments in each week, but this time she wrote, I've had a virus, not COVID, and I feel very fatigued. And the usual thing. I had to fight my way into positivity upon waking and so on. I feel really tired, she says. Then she gets T3, right? 10 micrograms. And she doesn't know what she's on, of course, and it stays about the same, 210, 230. Then selenium. Then she stops. Then she goes to Spain on holiday. And you see what happens. Your well-being score shoots up. And then she buys in Spain something called Arco Pharma placebo. It wasn't called that, Arco Pharma, something else, natural stuff. And she took that for 2 weeks, it was unblinded, okay? And she's clearly recovering from a holiday. So this is a lot. So I saw her in clinic yesterday, and I went through all this with her. And she agreed with me that actually the T3 didn't help at all. So she's not going to chase that any further. And she wants me to prescribe a holiday in Spain, which is what really worked, okay? Yes, indeed. So that is the cure. And what is really quite interesting, right, is then yesterday she went through a load of other life issues that she got away from, and it's the life issues that make her tired. And all these placebos, these are vulnerable people who are given things that we shouldn't be using really. So just bear that in mind. That's my last slide. So any questions or comments or thoughts? Yes, thank you, Jeremy. Spain and T3, yeah. It's not just endocrinologists. So these high-tech doctors, actually, they're not endocrinologists, you know. They're sort of, there's quite a lot of GPs, there's quite a lot of random FRCOG holding retired doctors.
Karim, hello. I put my microphone on. That was a great talk. So, can I spend 2 minutes telling some other adverse effects of people taking these sorts of medicines? So this whole Chinese herb nephropathy story. Yes. Shall I? It's such a fascinating parallel to what you're talking about, and the harms. Of course, this is not just placebo, but of course there are major harms from taking this sort of stuff. So shall I do that? Have you got 2 minutes?
Yes, we have.
I'll put my camera on because it's much nicer for people to see me. So hi, I'm Jeremy Levy. I'm a nephrologist. So this was a story that emerged in 1999 initially, when there was an outbreak in Belgium of women between the ages of 20 and 35. There were a couple over than 35, but basically young women who within a 6-month period, 90 of them ended up on dialysis with essentially accelerated kidney failure. So this was an epidemic of renal failure, putting people on dialysis in Belgium. So why were they all women? So were they all women because they turned out they'd attended 2 slimming centres in Belgium where they'd been prescribed Chinese herbs to help them slim, and they took them and it put them on dialysis. And over about a year of investigation, it became clear that they'd all been given a herb called Aristolochia. And Chinese herbalists actually have known for a long time that Aristolochia is a pretty nasty thing and not used for anything therapeutically in a Chinese herb fashion, but is occasionally used. And quite how it got into the bag of dried stuff that people bought, of course, nobody quite knows. There are 2 stories, because when you buy your herbs, you've no idea what you're buying. You're buying dust off the floor and you have no idea what's in there. So either Aristolochia is a clematis family flower. So it could easily have been that you can grow it in your back garden, you dry it down and you call it something else and you charge 100 quid for it. There's a story that the Chinese symbol for Aristolochia looks very similar to the Chinese symbol for stercolia, which is a herb that's used for various things. And there's some mix up in the labeling, but that seems a bit unlikely. So anyway, these women all on dialysis because they've been poisoned by their herb, which is Aristolochia. And then a year later, the first one of them starts dying with cancer, because it turns out that aristolochic acid, which is the active part of Aristolochia, is a mutagen, and it causes cancers. And half the women died over the next 5 years. We had 3 patients between 2000 and 2002 at Imperial who got themselves through Chinese herbs poisoned and ended up on dialysis. And one died from metastatic urothelial cancer and the second died from breast cancer. And the breast tissue we were able to stain for aristolochic acid and could find aristolochic acid stuck to their DNA in their breast tumor. So from their Chinese herb, this chemical had circulated, bound to their DNA and caused cancer. So these are terrible outcomes from taking stuff that you don't know about. These are not harmless things potentially. The Chinese authorities, the Chinese government became very unhappy that this disease got called Chinese herb nephropathy, and the sort of political pressure that Karim comes under, it changed its name to aristolochic acid nephropathy, which to be fair is the accurate term. So it is now called and of course we don't see it anymore because this has disappeared. But it became a very wonderful, not story, but incidents of, don't go and buy your Chinese herbs.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's a good point. You see, it's the harm. And the other problem that patients say is, well, your drugs, the BNF says I've got side effects. Whereas my herbs, we don't know what they are, is what they should say. What they really say is they haven't got any side effects. And that is the real problem. We are honest about our side effects, and they need to be known about. Okay, thank you all. Before I go, I must tell you, I'll hit 10,000, by the way, all. Where am I? Where am I? Here we go. Oh, I can't see it now. Anyway, so in terms of signatures, if you haven't signed it, I'll just type here petition, it'll come up, of course. It's 10,124. Okay, so if you haven't signed it, please do and spread the word, because I now need 100,000, but I'm waiting for a government response because at 10,000, the government will respond. We wait for 6 days for a government response. Okay. Thank you all. See you next week. Any other questions or points about these terrible drugs?
Karim, could I just say one thing?
Yes.
I think we need to recognize that when patients go to alternative therapies, it's often they feel marginalized or ignored by Western medicine or the NHS. And it does point us or make us reflect and consider how we speak to the patient who presents with fatigue or obesity, who feels they're not able to lose weight or improve themselves. And I think you do a great job of explaining it to them and trying to use words and language to not make them feel rubbish about themselves. But I think it's something in acute medicine, I could improve myself in the way I talk to patients when I know that they can go home. But it's something that we should all think about, especially when we're all really tired after going through so many waves of COVID and seeing really, really sick patients, and then seeing the walking wounded come into ED.
Yes.
I just wanted to, these are just my thoughts, but I think it's worth people reflecting on it and thinking about it.
Yeah. Oh, and you're quite right, Joe. In oncology, so this is very tricky, isn't it? And part of the difficulty is that if you have a condition that is likely to kill you, and like cancer, and we're saying, look, we're very sorry, but we're now on a palliative pathway. I mean, I know some pretty sensible people who were terminal, and then the next thing I know is they're going and getting coffee enemas. You know, it's desperate. And I'm saying, look, nothing that can work. These are people who I knew when I was younger, and they were the same age as me. And I'm saying, I'm really sorry, but there's no cure for this. And then they go off and, because their coffee enema peddler says, well, this might work. And then they say to me, are you absolutely sure that coffee enemas won't work? And I go, I'm absolutely
no. Yeah. Well, no, you can never say never, is it? And I think in medicine, we'll always be honest.
Yeah.
You know, people come in with an odd side effect. I'm fairly sure it's not their medication, but I can't hand on heart tell them that. But I guess the difference when people solicit and pay for advice is they are given the advice that they've paid for, and they don't want to hear that it might not work. And what they get told is it might work.
Yes.
My own friend did that when she had metastatic breast cancer towards the end. And this is a medical academic, incredibly well published, very sensible. She spent so much money on adjuncts that, you know, I appreciate why she did it. Really important for her to feel like she'd done everything. But the amount of money it cost was eye-watering.
Yes. It's sad, isn't it? Now, there's two people with hands up. I think Joe's one of them. Joe was first.
Hi, everybody. I was just going to say, when we're classifying the medicine that we practice and the alternative medicines of all sorts, basically, if we could all prove that coffee on enemas did work, we would all do it, and it would no longer be alternative medicine, it would be medicine. And so my definition of as alternative medicine is anything that which we cannot prove. There may be some things that we, you know, if we can prove that something works, if I can prove that, I don't know, turning around 3 times and jumping up and down will cure my illness, and we prove it works, we'll do it, don't we?
Yes, always like remdesivir. And then there's another.
Yeah.
Hi, Kareem. I was just going to say, it's such a bind, isn't it? Because I think there are some things that we wouldn't count in Western medicine, like yoga, that might make our patients feel overall actually better in terms of their general well-being. And as far as I know, no one's died of yoga yet. But you know, so it's about kind of, George will probably find someone for me. It's about obviously, yeah, not fully rejecting that belief system that's making someone feel better, because within that, there's lots of nuance in itself, isn't there? And we are very fixed, and that's for a reason, but there probably is a broader way forward that is more holistic, that we just don't have time for in our kind of hospital culture, that is probably also important and might make people, like in your clinic, feel better in the long run.
Yeah, I agree.
They're not tired because of that. They're tired because of other things that you don't have time probably to talk to them about.
Yes. And then Mel's got a hand up.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is, it's not just about kind of alternative medicine, because the last lady that you were talking about who went to Spain and her well-being went up to 630, she was still saying, this is my thyroid condition. So, you know, I get the headache and that's all consistent with my thyroid. And I guess just the belief that's attached to that kind of medical label is so hard to break. And then there's something about trusting the experts that goes into a wider societal narrative, and maybe where people get their alternative narratives on Twitter or whatever can be very compelling and really difficult for us as doctors to sometimes negotiate.
Indeed.